The hot, dry weather we've had recently, not only in parts of the UK but also across parts of Europe, have led to some significant wildfires. I'm going to be talking about these as well as a few other things in this week's Deep Dive. Thank you so much for joining me. I'm Alex Burkill, presenter and meteorologist here at the Met Office, and I'm coming to you as we do every Tuesday from our headquarters here in Exeter. Make sure you hit that like button. Do leave any questions, any comments. I will be looking at them and we'll be going through some in the weather studio live this coming Friday when Annie and I will be back. And also make sure you're subscribed, and then you'll never miss one of these great deep dives or any of our other interesting videos. So, wildfires. Yes, parts of the UK have had wildfires in recent days, recent weeks. The dry weather, the hot weather means that the wildfire risk is elevated, and particularly across England and Wales where it's remaining dry. I'll talk about that in a second, but particularly in those areas, the wildfire risk does remain elevated. But I wanted to look at what's going on in parts of Europe where the wildfires have been severe. We have satellite imagery from yesterday, and you can see a lot of smoke because of the wildfires. A load of smoke over western parts of Spain, also an area of smoke over eastern parts of Spain due to the wildfires. The wildfires to the west of Madrid are the country's largest on record. And there's also an area of wildfires over near Bordeaux, which is around 4 times the size of Paris. Hundreds of thousands of people have been evacuated due to these wildfires, and with the continuation of the dry, hot weather, I'll be looking at how the temperatures are rising through the next day or so in this part of Europe in a second. But with the continuation of the dry weather, it's likely that these wildfires could get worse. Now, one thing that has been talked about in association with these wildfires, because it's not a particularly common occurrence, but sometimes when you get wildfires, you can also get storm clouds developing, thunderstorms triggered by the heat from the wildfires. Pyrocumulonimbus clouds, like I have here. This picture is actually from California a few years ago, not from parts of Europe, but nonetheless it shows this storm cloud that can develop as a result of wildfires or volcanoes. And yes, pyrocumulus, then pyrocumulonimbus, also known as cumulonimbus flammagenitus. And how does this develop? Well, when you get large wildfires, you get intense heat, and that leads to the air rising, as we get often when just the air is heated by the sun, that leads to it rising. But in this case, it's not the atmosphere leading to the cloud forming, it's the large intense heat from the fires, the wildfires. That then causes the air to rise up, and as it does so, the smoke plume that rises as well. And in the same way that clouds form generally, the water vapour within the air rises up, and as it does so, it cools down. Once it cools down, it can then condense. But for us to get our clouds, we need the water vapour to have something to condense on, a condensation nuclei. With the smoke plume caused by the wildfires, there are plenty of particles for the water vapour to condense on, and so that's when you get your clouds. Initially your pyrocumulus clouds, but if there's enough instability in the atmosphere, if there's enough momentum, enough updraft, then you get very large cumulonimbus clouds. And when I say large, these can rise to around 15 kilometers in height. They can blast through the tropopause and into the stratosphere, and then they can spread out, spreading the smoke particles. And if that happens, well, the smoke particles in association with them, well, they can linger for quite a while, several weeks in fact. But that's not the greatest cause for concern when it comes to these pyrocumulonimbus clouds, because they can cause further issues with regards to wildfires. You can get these downdrafts, downbursts, and that can lead to a bit of damage, yes, perhaps, but also can help fan the wildfires, causing them to spread quicker and further than they otherwise would have done. Now, there may be some rain in association with them, but not a huge amount. It's often quite light, so not really enough to help alleviate the issues as a result of the wildfires, especially with a bit of wind shear. Often the rain is a bit further away than the initial wildfires that triggered the thunderstorms. And there's also the potential for some dry lightning to occur, several kilometers perhaps away from the original wildfires, and that can then lead to more wildfires being triggered. NASA has labelled these as the fire-breathing dragon of clouds because they can cause more issues, more wildfires in areas which are already susceptible, that are already suffering as a result of wildfires. Now, these are fairly uncommon. They were thought to be more unusual before the days when we had satellite imagery because they weren't observed as much. But now with satellite imagery we can track them and see them, that they're slightly more common than we used to think across parts of North America and Australia in particular. They're not that usual in parts of Europe, but yes, in France over recent days these have been observed and they have made the wildfire issue worse. Now, the ongoing problems are likely to continue because there is more dry weather to come in that area and we're going to see temperatures rising as well. I'll come on to that in a second. But first of all, I just wanted to go back to the UK and look at how dry it's been recently because the answer is very dry indeed. This table here shows the stations which have had a large number of consecutive days without any rain being recorded. This is data up to and including yesterday, so the 27th of July. And if we look in that far right column, you can see a number of these stations, they still haven't had any rain. So their number is still increasing. It's been dry there today. There's more dry weather to come. I'll show you that in a minute. But yeah, so those stations, a number of them are going to continue to see that number of consecutive dry days rising through the rest of this week. Felsham, it's worth highlighting actually, we haven't had any data from that site since the 18th of July, so in reality that station could have had more days without any rainfall, but a large number of places haven't had any rainfall for such a long period of time. Is there any rain to come? Well, yes and no. It really depends on where you are in the country. Across northern parts of the UK, it is quite wet. There's more rain at the moment and there's more rain to come this week. But further south, it's a very different story. Really, really dry here. Let's zoom in just a little bit so we can get a bit more detail. But if I run this through, you see bands of rain coming in across parts of Northern Ireland. Scotland could see maybe 30, 40 millimetres of rain in some places, building up through the rest of today into tomorrow, maybe a bit more in some places. But if I just pause it there, all the time towards the south, it's dry, it's hot. I'll go through temperatures in a moment, but it's dry and it's hot. And we're not really seeing the rain that other parts towards the north are seeing. And then there is a front coming through and it brings a few spots of rain, but not a huge amount to southern areas. It's in northern parts where we're continuing to see some wet weather, and further south it stays dry. Into the weekend, it's a similar story. More rain across northern parts of the UK. Could be a bit heavy at times, but in the south staying dry. Now there is a weather system here which is coming closer towards us. This time yesterday that had a greater chance of pushing its way across the UK in time for Sunday, but now the latest model runs keep it pegged back further to the west, so it looks like those southern areas really are going to stay largely dry, barely any rain as we go through the rest of this week and at least into the weekend as well. Let's look at the rainfall totals that we could get across parts of the north of the UK, because yes, some places will have a bit of rain. Let's just make that the right view. And if we go through, let's pick our 6-hourly rainfall totals and let's just run through the next couple of days, because yes, with those bands of rain that I highlighted, some heavier amounts of rain across parts of Northern Ireland and western parts of Scotland, just north of the central belt. Looks like it will be a bit wet through the end of today and into Wednesday. And then there's more rain in association with those bands through Wednesday as well. A pulse of heavier rain arrives through Wednesday afternoon across Northern Ireland, and that feeds further north and eastwards across parts of Scotland as well. Through Thursday, some more wet weather, and it's particularly as we go through Thursday afternoon into the evening. So I think I'm going to lose it. I have to go to my other chart here. But yes, as we go through Thursday afternoon and into the evening, that's when we have the potential for some heavier rain across particularly northern, perhaps northeastern parts of Scotland to develop. Oh, apologies, that was our 3-hour rainfall, so that was a little bit misleading. Let's go through to our 6-hour rainfall just so it's the same scale. And you can see some high rainfall totals, maybe 40, perhaps up to 50 millimetres building up in just 6 to 12 hours across some parts of the northeast. So it could be quite wet. All the while, if you've been paying attention, looking further south, barely a drop of rain arriving here. And that's the picture that we also take into the weekend. Not a huge amount of rain to come away from the north of the UK, where it will be relatively wet at times. In terms of how wet, well, I've already alluded to it with those rainfall totals, but I just wanted to highlight Thursday afternoon, evening time, because that's when we have the potential for some heavier rainfall across parts of eastern, northeastern Scotland in particular. This chart is showing the chance of greater than 10 millimetres in 6 hours, but I think it's a very high chance really in this neck of the woods, and the lightning risk is quite high as well. We can see that if we look at a tephigram for that area for this coming Thursday, you can see the atmosphere, well, it's unstable. The lean in the tephigram showing that we have this potential energy that can zoom up, can boom up through the atmosphere, leading to those thunderclouds. Not due to wildfires or anything, but just your unstable atmosphere allowing for the severe convection for the thunderstorms to kick off. So across eastern, northeastern parts of Scotland through Thursday afternoon, yes, there's a significant thunder risk, and we could see some high rainfall totals building up. Otherwise, rainfall-wise, and Sunday. I highlighted this earlier when I was going through the pressure chart, but as I mentioned, yesterday's model runs hinted that we could see this weather system coming in from the southwest and pushing its way across the UK, but that now looks like it's less likely, more likely to be delayed at least until early next week if it does come across. Here I have the Met Office model on the left hand side, and it keeps it way to the west-southwest of us. This is for midnight on Sunday morning. Meanwhile, the EC, European Centre for Medium Range Weather Forecasting, and the American, the GFS model, they do bring it still a little bit further east, closer towards the UK, but they're all in fairly good agreement that the dry weather looks set to last across those southern parts, at least through the weekend, because even though they're a bit further east, they still keep that rain to the west of us. So if you are hoping for some significant rain in those southern areas, if you're a gardener, a farmer or whatnot, I'm afraid it's not good news for the time being. Then, as well as it being so very dry recently, a big talking point has been how warm it's been, how hot it's been. Temperatures are rising again now. Let's look back at what we've had so far, and this chart, which is from a website, roostweather.com, worth checking out if you want to delve into some statistics and some figures and some observations that we've had across the UK. It's a really good website. And what this chart is showing is how widespread the coverage of places exceeding their heatwave threshold since the beginning of May. So this top chart looks at day by day whether or not each place has exceeded their threshold temperature. Remember, around the London area, the threshold's 28 Celsius, and towards the north and west, it's only 25. So depending on where you are, varies that value, but this takes that into account. And you can see the heat wave that we had towards the end of May, where we had our highest ever May temperature, then the exceptional heat wave during the end of June, where we had our highest ever June temperature, and then the very long heat wave that we've had through a large chunk of July. Now this top table is looking for individual days. The middle table middle chart is showing the how widespread the coverage of stations which had at least 3 days where they exceeded their heatwave threshold. Remember, for it technically to be a heatwave, our current Met Office definition is 3 consecutive days exceeding your heatwave threshold. So these are places where it has been exceeded. Now, technically, the May one only lasted around 5 days. The June one, similar, was 5 or was 6 days just by the skin of its teeth. Interestingly, this July one has gone on for such a long period of time, but there's been peaks and troughs in terms of how widespread it's been and also exactly where it's been. So some places, the southeast, they were hot initially and then they dropped down a bit and then they've risen up again. And you can actually see that, to be honest, since I think it's around I can't remember what day, but it was a long time ago. It was early in July, somewhere in I think it's around the 3rd of July, I think I looked up, somewhere in the UK has been in its heat wave threshold, both in terms of it's exceeded its value and it's been on at least 3 consecutive days exceeding that value. So it's gone on for a really long period of time. But in recent days, Sunday was a cooler day. There haven't been that many places. But now, as we go through the beginning of this week, we're seeing more places picking up again. Again, we're going to see the heat becoming more widespread. No, that's not true. We're going to see the heat peaking in the southeast on Wednesday. And that's when we like to see temperatures back into the mid-30s. I'll show you that again in a second. So this heat wave has gone on for a really long period of time, but because we had this chunk, if you will, where there was a larger, more areas were in their heat wave threshold than the very small number of stations over at the back end of last week and a little bit before that. We're kind of classing this as heat wave 1, this is heat wave 2, this is heat wave 3, and now we're in a heat wave 4 at the moment, because we're going to see temperatures again, like I say, getting back into the mid-30s Celsius. Looking at individual stations and taking Exeter Airport, for example, and this is the site across the UK which had the longest run of its heat wave threshold being exceeded. It had 21 days in a row. Sunday was the first day where it didn't, but yeah, 21 days in a row where it exceeded its heat wave threshold. And quite interesting, if you go back to just a few days before, so I think that's trying to picture it, I think that's the 3rd and the 4th. They were 24.7, 24.8 Celsius, so very close to the 25 Celsius threshold that Exeter has. But then it jumped up and temperatures were in the very high 20s, low 30s, low to mid 30s really for a large chunk of July. And then they've gradually dropped down a little bit. And then, as I mentioned, Sunday was a slightly fresher day. But then we jumped back up and got above 25 on Monday. So, another day with temperatures above the heatwave threshold. But yes, 21 days in a row for Exeter Airport where it had its heatwave threshold exceeded. So, yeah, a very long, 3-week long heatwave it has been. I've almost forgotten what it's like to see rain and what it's like to not be hot, to be honest. But what's going to happen going forward? And I can show you that in a few different ways. Here I have our 1,000 to 850 hectopascal thickness. So we're looking at the warmth in the air by looking at how thick it is. The thicker the air, the more warmth there is because it spreads out more. And what we can see through today, we have some relatively high thickness in excess of 140 over parts of East Anglia, Lincolnshire, and down into more towards more central parts of southern England. But we're dragging in some hotter air from the south through the end of today and into Wednesday, and that means we're getting even higher thicknesses in excess of 142 across parts of the east-southeast of the UK on Wednesday, so that's when we're likely to see the peak of the heat. Worth noting, further north and west, there's a change. We're seeing fresher air coming in from the northwest by Wednesday, so more places will be slightly cooler on Wednesday than today, but in the southeast it's going to be markedly hotter. And then the highest thicknesses, they clear away towards the southeast, so there is a bit of a change and things will turn a bit fresher, a bit more comfortable later on in the week. Let's show you that now. If I put on our air mass chart, and if I just run this through, and you can see the fronts that are bringing rain across parts of Scotland, Northern Ireland, Northern England at the moment, but we're ahead of this. Actually, one thing I wanted to show at the same time as I do this is the wind direction. You can see into Wednesday, we're getting our winds coming up from the south. There's a lot of hot air across parts of France, Spain at the moment with those wildfires as well. And we're tapping into some of that, which is why we're seeing those higher thicknesses in our air across parts of the southeast on Wednesday because of the slight shift in wind direction as this high pressure to the east of us shifts away towards the east. But running through, and yes, we have hot air across parts of the southeast. There is a front coming through on Wednesday. As I mentioned earlier, it doesn't bring a huge amount of rain, but it does bring slightly fresher, slightly more comfortable perhaps, air in from the northwest, and so temperatures by the end of the week will be a fair bit lower than they are particularly on Wednesday. Even today, I mean, temperatures are in excess of 30 Celsius today, and it's been a few days since we've been above 30 Celsius, not super long, but it's hot, and then it's going to be even hotter still on Wednesday. Then I did just want to, whilst we're looking at this chart, because I wanted to show it, the temperatures across parts of Europe. And if I just remember how to do this, I've put a temperature already there. Let's put couple of temperatures just randomly on, because yes, temperatures across parts of Europe at the moment are exceptionally, oh, I can't do that with that on, are exceptionally high, and we're seeing, if I just run this through Wednesday, high 30s, getting into the low 40s across parts of Spain, if I put a couple of temperatures there, and also in France we could be looking at temperatures getting into the low 40s as well, peaking on Wednesday. And then whilst the hot air continues across parts of Spain into Thursday, temperatures could be looking at 40 to 45 Celsius in some places. Here across France, we're actually going to see the extreme heat clearing away towards the east and pushing across more parts of Germany, and that's where we're going to be seeing temperatures into the mid to high 30s perhaps. So France's hottest day is likely to be tomorrow, when there's a reasonable chance some places will get above 40 Celsius. Meanwhile, for Spain and then later more eastern parts of Europe, it continues or pushes its way in slightly later in the week. And with the hot weather, well, as I mentioned, that's going to keep those wildfires a major cause for concern. One other thing that I can show you, if I get this chart up, and let's get rid of those. Cool. And I wanted to just highlight our maximum temperatures for the next few days. Let's start off by looking at today. I already mentioned it, but 30 Celsius, quite like, well, we've seen 30 Celsius today in the southeast, I believe. And it's the first time, as I mentioned, for a little while that we've been above 30 Celsius, but not super long. And then tomorrow we're likely to see temperatures peaking around 34 or 35. If we get above 35, it will be the 7th day this year where somewhere in the UK has had temperatures in excess of 35, so equal to or in excess of 35 Celsius. That's a record. We'd already beaten the record for the most number of days above 35 Celsius in a year. And so if we get above it again, that record's just going to get pushed even further. But as I mentioned, well, two things. Fresher air starting to push its way in across northern and western parts by Wednesday, so whilst it's hotter in the southeast, it's fresher towards the northwest. Meanwhile, that fresher air will eventually make its way further south and east through the end of the week. But we're still looking at temperatures in the mid to high 20s, so it's not exactly cold by any means. And even as we go further ahead, through the weekend and into next week, we're still looking at mid to high 20s and lots of dry weather, as I alluded to, lots of sunshine, especially towards the south through the weekend and even into the beginning of next week. So really, if you're after something cooler, it's, tomorrow is going to be the hottest day for a little while, but it's not going to be a much cooler. Temperatures still above average for many, especially across central and southern parts. And if you're after something drier, sorry, no, not many people are after something dry. If you're after something wetter, well, really in the south you do have to wait for quite a while longer. Right, I think that's everything that I wanted to cover today. Thank you for joining me for this week's deep dive. As I said at the start, hit that like button, get your comments, your questions coming in. We'll be looking at some of them this afternoon and also some of them in the Weather Studio Live on Friday with Annie and me. And make sure you're subscribed and make sure you're sharing this with anyone who you think might be interested in anything that I've talked about today. Then one last thing that I did just want to point out. On the 12th of August, so it's a little while away, but I wanted to give you an early heads up. There is an eclipse which will be visible across parts of the UK. So you may want to think ahead, and if you're planning on viewing it, you may want to get yourself some eclipse sunglasses. Got a little tip this morning that they're relatively cheap at the moment, but the price for them will go up as we get nearer the time. So may want to plan ahead. Anyway, thank you so much, and I will see you again soon. Enjoy the rest of your day. Bye-bye.